Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Jim Henson's film Labyrinth. So this is a coming-of-age story, and it's an epic journey. And I mean that in the sense of Joseph Campbell's theory of the monomyth, which comes from his book, The Hero with a Thousand Faces. And basically what Campbell talks about in that book is a cross-cultural narrative structure that applies to epic journeys or heroic quests. And there's disagreement now about how actually cross-cultural this is, or whether or not Campbell overstates his case. But essentially the idea here is that across epic journey myths, there's a set of phases or a set of characteristics that these stories involve. This is what Campbell calls the monomyth, the sort of core elements of the epic journey as a structure. And Labyrinth has all of them. So I've written them down for myself, so I remember what all of them are. But basically, the movie starts in the ordinary world. And it's an interesting take on the ordinary world because we have this character named Sarah, played by Jennifer Connelly, who lives in this sort of teenage fantasy world, not just of like knights in shining armor and princesses and damsels in distress, fairies, goblins, magic, etc., but also like dolls and teddy bears and things like this. So interestingly enough, the ordinary world for her is still a space suffused by magic, suffused by the supernatural. But the hero, so the first major stage of the monomyth is that the hero departs the ordinary world. And this happens when Sarah's stepmother, who she detests, basically forces her to babysit her baby brother Toby. And Sarah wishes that the goblins would come and take Toby away, which they oblige her by doing. The Goblin King then sort of shows up. The Goblin King, Jareth, played by David Bowie, shows up and he says to her, "I've taken Toby away. I'm going to turn him into a goblin. You're welcome." And she's like, "I actually kind of need my brother back." And Jareth's like, "Well, if you can get to my castle at the center of the labyrinth, middle of the Goblin City, maybe you can get him back." And he transports her to this supernatural realm. The realm of the labyrinth, the realm of the Goblin City, and the realm of the Goblin King's castle. So this is her leaving the ordinary world, and the challenge to get to the castle is the call to adventure phase of the monomyth. Next, the hero crosses a threshold, typically with the help of a mentor. Now, this is an interesting one in the Labyrinth because, for my money, there's two ways we can interpret this. One is when she crosses... Well, I think the weaker argument is that she crosses a threshold when she's brought into the world of the Labyrinth by Jareth, in which case we have that first crossing of a threshold. But that's really more of the departing the ordinary world, although usually I think departing the ordinary world involves crossing a threshold. So there's that element of it. But I think the better case for the moment where she crosses a threshold is when she actually enters the labyrinth, which she does with the help of a character named Hoggle, who he's a dwarf, maybe? I mean, he gets called a dwarf a couple of times, but it's not entirely clear. Like, the actual, like, species classification of a lot of the characters here is not super clear. So Hoggle is very small, He's a puppet. I mean, this is Jim Henson, so most of this is puppets. Typically, the threshold is crossed with the help of a mentor. Hoggle's an interesting potential mentor because he does actually help. He helps Sarah get into the labyrinth initially. He also gives her the initial piece of crucial information that she absolutely needs, which is that not everything is as it seems in the labyrinth. So Hoggle's potentially the teacher, the mentor, the one who sort of the Gandalf, if you will, to Sarah's Frodo. But he also betrays Sarah. He abandons her, etc., etc. So he's not a great mentor. He's a complicated mentor, maybe. But you have that element. She crosses the threshold into the supernatural realm. In the labyrinth, passages change. You can't depend on your senses, etc., etc. You can walk through walls sometimes, but sometimes walls will spring up to block your path, etc., etc. It's a space where the normal laws of physics, the normal rules don't apply, or apply only in a distorted way. So the next component is a road of trials. And this is the actual journey itself. Sarah spends a long time moving through the labyrinth, and there are these different trials. So she comes, for instance, to a number of double doors, where you have one door that leads to certain death, and the other door that leads you to the center of the labyrinth. She has to work out which one is which. She sometimes gets attacked by these various creatures and things like this, and she has to either fight them off or escape or whatever it is. But also along the way, she picks up allies, which is a crucial component of the monomyth. In addition to the mentor, you find people, or the hero finds people who will assist them. So in this case, this is Ludo, who's a large monster thing, who doesn't seem very bright, but he's kind, and he has, because he's friends with the rocks, he can convince rocks to do things, an ability which helps them out a number of times. You also have Sir Didymus, who is a very, very small dog, who is a knight who guards a bridge, but then he joins them on their quest, and Sir Didymus is very much convinced that he can fight anybody at any time and take them. So we have these allies who assist in the journey. The hero goes through the road of trials, and they end up. So one of the trials is often a death and resurrection type thing. And this is very, very overt in Labyrinth, because Jareth continually sort of appears to Hoggle and says, you have to stop her, you have to take her back to the beginning, and Hoggle, who's terrified of Jareth, continually agrees to do this, although he doesn't necessarily do it that much. But the one time he really overtly engages in subterfuge here is when Jareth gives Hoggle a peach to have Sarah eat. She eats it and she forgets that she was on a journey to find Toby. She is taken by this sort of, I don't know, garbage collector kind of Muppet character into a cave the inside of which is actually Sarah's room. So she's brought back into her room, brought back into the ordinary world, and she's given her various things. All of the stuff that she loves, her teddy bear, Lancelot, her various dolls, magic, toys, and whatnot that she has. And this is the temptation. But this is also the death. She has lost her memory of what she's doing. She's lost her role as the hero, lost her place in the quest. But when she recognizes that all of the stuff that she has, all of the possessions that she had put such stock in, are not worth anything. They're not worth what Toby is worth. We have the resurrection. The room begins to crumble, and Sarah climbs out of the cave back to Ludo and Sir Didymus, back to the quest. She regains her memory, and so we have that death and resurrection. Then they fight their way through the Goblin City, which is the last major trial on the road of trials. And when Sarah second to last, maybe. Because when Sarah actually gets into the Goblin King's castle, she's in this sort of M.C. Escher inspired space where there are stairs that go in every different angle, staircases move, etc., etc. And she's trying to get to Toby, and she's unable to get to him until finally she realizes that she cannot remain safe by just climbing stairs toward him. She has to leap from the stairs that she is on to the platform where Toby sits. And in that leap of faith, she conquers the last of the trials before you get to the ordeal. So the ordeal is the climax of the epic journey, where the hero faces the final ultimate test. And in this case, it's a direct confrontation with Jareth, who, once again, promises to make all of her dreams come true. Everything that she's ever wished for in her fantasies, in her desire to have this sort of supernatural life, Jareth can make all of that come true. And the ordeal is to resist that temptation, to remain selfless, and to give up the things that she ostensibly wants in favor of getting Toby back. Toby, who initially she doesn't really feel all that positively toward. And she manages to do this by reciting a particular speech from a play version of the Labyrinth that we saw her practicing at the beginning. And it seems like her mother had been an actor who played that role or something like this, and that's why Sarah has such a strong connection to it. But by reciting these lines, basically declaring that she is the equal of the Goblin King and he has no power over her, the spell is broken. And when the hero in the monomyth successfully passes the ordeal, they gain what's called a boon, which is basically some sort of positive reward, essentially. So in this case, Sarah's most obvious boon is that she gets Toby back. He hasn't been turned into a goblin. They get to return to their regular life. And that's a component of the monomyth as well, is the return to the ordinary world, either bringing the boon with you or to disperse the boon in the ordinary world. And one of the interesting things is, while Toby is the most obvious boon, he's the thing that she gets back, Sarah also gets another boon. And this is really where the coming of age story component comes in, because Sarah is able to integrate more comfortably, more effectively into the world when she returns from the labyrinth. We see her taking down some of the pictures of her mom, symbolizing her antagonism toward her stepmother and her dedication to exclusively this old life. We see her putting away some of her fantasy stuff, including the play script of the labyrinth. And so all of this represents Sarah's transition into a more adult approach to the world. She's no longer immersed in fantasy. She's no longer she's no longer the sort of self-centered, childish character that she is in the beginning. She's able to put others first in a way that she isn't at the beginning of the play, or at the beginning of the film. I'm sorry. And so this is in a way a dispersal of the Boon, because we get the sense, or we get the implication, that her relationship with her stepmother is going to improve, which will also, of course, mean that her relationship with her father will improve as well, because they're slightly estranged, because Sarah resents him for having married another woman after her mother died. But the interesting thing for me is that this is not, now I'm a full adult and I don't need or have access to the fantasy world anymore. This is not a complete abandonment of the world of fantasy, the world of magic, the world of the supernatural, because as Sarah is sort of looking into her mirror, she sees the reflections of first Sir Didymus and then Hoggle. And Hoggle basically says, "We'll always be here if you need us." And Sarah says, "I do need you." And she turns around and there's just a ton of Muppets in her room, basically. Hoggle is there, Sir Didymus is there, Ludo is there. All of these different characters that she's met in the labyrinth are in the room. And they basically have this like weird psychedelic party. And so what we get is not this sort of biblical, when I was a child, I spake as a child, but then when I became a man, I put away childish things, or whatever the Bible verse is. This is not, I put away childish things. This is, I developed a more sophisticated ability to know when childish things are appropriate. We continue to live in the world of magic. We continue to live in the world of fantasy. We continue to live in the world of the supernatural, just not all the time. We can live in the real world and in the world of magic. And what it means to be an adult in this film is to know when you can live in each one.